After getting back together with Liam, I had stopped clinging to him the way I used to. One night, he came home late after a department dinner. His face was dark as he confronted me. "Do you have any idea how long I waited for your call? Everyone else's girlfriend or wife called, everyone except you. You weren't like this before." I cut him off softly. "But didn't you say that was annoying?" He froze. Later, Liam stumbled through the bedroom door, drunk. I jolted awake just as he flicked on the overhead light. The sudden brightness forced me to squeeze my eyes shut. His overcoat fell in a heap on the floor. The smell of alcohol clung to him, his expression stormy. "Why didn't you call me?" he demanded. I blinked, confused. "What?" His brow furrowed. Anger mixed with something indefinable, almost hurt. "I was out for dinner tonight. You didn't call me. Every other guy there got calls from their partners, the whole table. I was waiting for your call until midnight." His agitation grew, chest heaving, as he yanked his tie loose. "You weren't like this before. Every time I went out, you'd call by 9, telling me to drink less, to come home early. You'd ask who I was with, if there were any women this time. You didn't ask anything." He pointed at the sleep mask I still wore on my forehead. "And before, you wouldn't sleep until I was home. Now, you didn't even leave a single light on for me. The whole place was pitch black when I got back." I looked at him and interrupted softly. "But wasn't that what you said was annoying?" His voice cut off abruptly, words catching in his throat. I lowered my gaze. "Last time I picked him up, remember? He had told me to my face that I was annoying, that I should stop smothering him. The issue of calling him during dinners had caused several fights before our previous breakup. Several younger nurses in his department clearly had crushes on him. I had walked in on little scenes, nurses bringing him homemade lunches, especially recently with that intern, his junior Hannah. They got along well. I admit I felt insecure. That's why I couldn't help questioning him. Plus, his stomach was sensitive. Too much alcohol meant days of pain. I always worried he'd overdo it. I couldn't resist calling him. The last big fight before we broke up had been over a department dinner. I called at 9 p.m. It took him ages to answer. "What now?" His impatient voice came down the line. "Your stomach was hurting just the other day. Try not to drink too much." A girl laughed in the background. "Don't worry, Olivia. I'll make sure Liam behaves," chirped Hannah. I paused, about to ask Liam why he'd said no women were coming tonight, when he abruptly hung up. By midnight, he still wasn't back. Calling again went straight to voicemail. Worried something had happened, I drove to their usual spot. Getting out of my car, I saw Liam standing under a streetlight, looking perfectly sober, draping his jacket over the shoulders of a young woman opposite him. "Hannah." His colleague spotted me and started ribbing him. "Someone's got a strict keeper, new lovebirds. My wife would be dead asleep by now. Couldn't care less. Lucky man. Dr. Evans." Liam's face darkened with each comment. Hannah, her hair neatly pinned and looking sharp, adjusted the jacket and nudged him playfully. "Wow, Liam, does Olivia manage your schedule like she's your mom? Calling and showing up?" She turned to me with a sweet smile. "Seriously, guys need breathing. Holding on too tight just pushes them away faster. Liam's crazy busy as it is. All this pressure isn't good for him, right? Don't bother explaining, she wouldn't get it." Liam opened the passenger door for Hannah. "Get in. I'll drop you home." He didn't look at me again, walking straight past me to the driver's side. Hannah rolled down her window, waving. "Thanks for the lift, Olivia." I stood alone in the cold wind, watching their car disappear around the corner. One of Liam's quieter nurses approached me. "He's probably just stressed, Olivia. Patient load has been heavy. He's exhausted. Don't take it personally." The winter wind cut deep. I pulled my coat tighter. Breaking up with Liam wasn't because of one thing. It was everything. When I finally made the decision, my friends thought I'd lost my mind. "You're breaking up with Liam Evans? What kind of guy are you looking for then?" I understood their confusion. On paper, Liam was perfect, handsome, from a wealthy family, brilliant. He'd sailed through med school and residency, landed a job at one of the best hospitals on the West Coast, and became the youngest attending in his department. His future was blindingly bright. Generous gifts for anniversaries and holidays, luxuries I could never afford to reciprocate, came naturally to him. When I complained about my commute after graduation, he bought me a car. Even my parents said I'd hit the jackpot. But I always felt he didn't love me. He loved the idea of having a girlfriend. He was fulfilling a role. Whoever held the title would have received the same treatment. I felt invisible. He didn't care about my feelings, my highs or lows. He actively discouraged me from relying on him. His constant refrain was that I needed to be more independent. Over the years, buried in studies and work, we barely dated. I ate alone, watched movies alone, celebrated birthdays alone, kept the home fires burning alone, waiting for him to come back. He didn't love me. I had a boyfriend, yet felt lonelier than when I was single. I couldn't live like that anymore. Breaking up was easier than I expected. When I called Liam to say we needed to talk, he just grunted, okay, before hanging up. I didn't expect him to show up at my door 3 months later.
Drunk.
Loving him had been a habit. We ended up tangled together, confused, and just as confusedly got back together. But after that, I kept remembering his words. I tried hard to be independent. Now he was asking why I wasn't. Tall Liam clearly remembered. By 2, he opened his mouth. I looked down. I'm tired, Liam. Let's just sleep. Otherwise, I might have argued. I might have yelled. I might have spent the night crying. Now I just felt empty, exhausted. I couldn't be bothered. Liam's light brown eyes flickered behind his frameless glasses. He pressed a hand to his stomach. My stomach's killing me. Can you make me some soup? I used to make him soup whenever he drank. Something warm always helped settle his stomach. But now, that instinctive concern was gone, replaced only by the irritation of being woken up. I pulled the covers up, turning my back to him. There's instant ramen in the pantry. Make it yourself. Close the door on your way out. I have work tomorrow. Silence hung heavy behind me. After a long moment, the bed shifted as Liam stood, his footsteps heavier than usual fading down the hall. The door clicked softly shut. Darkness reclaimed the room. I closed my eyes. When I woke the next morning, Liam was gone. The ashtray on the coffee table overflowed with cigarette butts. He hadn't slept. I looked away, didn't ask. I only realized I needed the hospital. After days of low-grade fever and a worsening cough, dragging myself in, I was diagnosed with pneumonia. Heading to the forum, I bumped into one of Liam's nurses. Olivia, you okay? You look terrible. Pneumonia? I managed with a weak smile. Just heading here alone? She asked, surprised. Why didn't you tell Liam he could have come with you? I paused. He's busy. It's fine. I didn't want to bother him. Well, okay. Let me know if you need anything. I found a chair in the busy room for. The fluid entering my vein felt cold. Winter was brutal. Nearby, a young couple sat. The girl carefully tucked her boyfriend's jacket around his shoulders, leaning on him to sleep. When he drifted off, he gently held the 4-tube, warming the fluid with his palm. I leaned back on the hard plastic chair, exhausted. Must have been the fever. I fell asleep despite the discomfort. Half dreaming, I drifted back to before Liam and I broke up. I was still clinging. Once, I'd had a nasty bout of gastroenteritis, vomiting, cramps, the works. Ended up in the ER. I begged Liam to stay with me. I feel awful. Please, just for a little while, please. Liam had given me a detached look. Gastroenteritis won't kill you. Don't be so dramatic. I have actual patients waiting. I started to protest, but Hannah walked in. She spotted Liam immediately and grabbed his arm. Liam, there you are. Mr. Peterson in 304, his symptoms are weird. I'm scared Dr. Harrison will chew me out. Can you please come look? Her voice was pure syrup. Liam's expression softened almost imperceptibly. What's going on? Don't panic. I'll come see. He glanced back at me. I thought he might say something. Just go home after the drip, he said flatly. I'm busy. I won't be able to check on you. I watched him walk out with Hannah at the door. She looked back, her smile a challenge, laced with triumph. Gastroenteritis was agony. Midway through the 4, I felt violently nauseous. I called the nurse to unhook me and stumbled to the bathroom. Retching made my ribs ache. Afterwards, I stood at the sink, gripping the counter, staring at the ghost in the mirror, pale, hollow. Blood welled from the needle site on my hand. I hadn't pressed down. A dark stain bloomed on my shirt. Utterly pathetic. After that, I never told Liam when I was sick. Something soft settled over me in sleep. I opened my eyes. Liam stood there, frowning. You're sick. Why didn't you tell me? The 4-bag was almost empty. I pushed his coat off me. It's nothing serious. I know you're busy. I'm not that busy. He reached into the study. My arm froze midair. I knew he remembered. Liam, I've got a solo procedure coming up. I really need a hand. Hannah breezed in, stopping short when she saw me. Her smile was bright, practiced. Olivia.
Hey.
What's wrong? Should have told us you were coming. I ignored her, speaking flatly to Liam. I'll head out then. I'll drive you. He grabbed my arm, turning to Hannah without missing a beat. Can't find someone else? His tone was ice-cold, unrecognizable. I was startled. Had they fallen out? I woke to the faint hum of the city outside, the usual morning chaos muffled by the walls I had grown accustomed to. The apartment smelled faintly of yesterday's coffee, bitter and abandoned. The cup still sat on the counter, half full, untouched, as if waiting for someone who had stopped coming. I didn't reach for it. I didn't move. Instead, I listened, to the tick of the clock, to the emptiness that had become the background of my life. Time didn't rush me forward. It stretched, heavy and deliberate, like the space Liam used to fill so completely, so insistently, that I had forgotten how to breathe on my own. My phone vibrated against the countertop. I glanced at it. Liam. A message, brief, impatient. I read it, then set the phone down without replying. I felt the faint thrill of small rebellion ripple through me. No guilt, only awareness. I was not his keeper, not anymore. The day went on with quiet, deliberate observation. I noticed my own routines, how deeply they had been shaped around him. The way I poured my coffee in the morning, always the exact temperature he liked. The way I arranged the living room, leaving space for him to settle in, even when he hadn't been there for weeks. The way I measured my own needs against his, adjusting, shrinking, waiting. I didn't adjust today. I left the blinds half shut, so sunlight spilled unevenly across the floor. I moved a chair into the corner where it blocked his favorite spot on the sofa. I even ignored the tiny impulse to tidy the bedroom, leaving the sheets slightly rumpled, the pillows uneven. It was nothing dramatic. It was only small acts, whispers of independence, but it felt like a quiet declaration. By afternoon, I found myself staring out the window, watching the people below move through the city with a rhythm that had no concern for me. I realized how many of my own rhythms had been tethered to him, when I ate, when I slept, even when I laughed. And now, for the first time in years, those rhythms belonged to me. The clock ticked loudly in the background, almost unbearably. I wanted to drown it out with music, a call, a message, but I didn't. I let the silence press in. It was uncomfortable, yes, but alive. That evening, the phone vibrated again. Another text. I ignored it. I poured another cup of coffee, let it cool, and didn't touch it. I let the emptiness exist without trying to fill it. By the time night came, the apartment was dark except for the faint glow of the streetlights outside. I sat on the sofa, knees drawn to my chest, breathing in the quiet, tasting the absence that had once been unbearable. It wasn't loneliness. Not entirely. It was the first trace of clarity, the first echo of a self I hadn't known I had lost. For the first time in a long time, I was not waiting. I was simply here. I found myself back in the hospital that afternoon, sitting in the corner of the staff lounge with a mug of coffee that had gone cold. My fingers absently traced the rim, noting the chip in the porcelain I'd never bothered to fix. Liam was somewhere beyond the sliding doors, immersed in his routines, moving from patient to patient with a precision that left no room for distraction, or for me. I watched him from a distance, the way he softened when speaking to a young intern, laughed quietly at a joke someone whispered, or paused mid-step to adjust a patient's blanket. It was familiar, comfortable, even, but it wasn't for me. Not anymore. Hannah appeared then, stepping lightly through the corridor. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor. She had a smile on her face, bright, effortless, and yet, beneath it, I caught the slightest tension in her shoulders, the subtle hesitancy in her movements. She watched Liam, just as I did, but differently. She leaned against the wall, pretending to check her notes, yet her eyes followed him, careful, measured, waiting for a smile, a glance, a recognition that felt like a reward. I realized then what had always unsettled me. Intimacy was not one-sided. It was a delicate, two-way currency. With me, Liam had once expected devotion, vigilance, emotional labor. With her, it was lighter, easier, almost playful, and he responded with a warmth I had longed for but rarely received.
Hannah.
I paused outside the staff lounge, pretending to scan the board for patient updates. I didn't need to scan. I already knew where Liam would be. He moved through the ER with quiet authority, a tension in his jaw I wanted to smooth, if only I could. I wasn't trying to interfere, not really. I just wanted to see him at ease. Even for a moment. I admired him quietly. Not like the others, who were blinded by ambition or charm. I admired the way he noticed the smallest details, how a patient winced at a touch, how a nurse faltered under pressure. And yes, I wanted his attention, but more than that, I wanted to witness the man who could be gentle without thinking twice, who could soften around someone who needed him. I caught a glimpse of Olivia then. She was seated in the lounge, coffee untouched, staring at the floor. Her presence was quiet, almost ghost-like. I couldn't decide if she saw me or not. And I realized something. Her attention was protective, habitual, a reflection of what Liam demanded rather than what she chose. She loved him differently, in a way that had already cost her something she might never get back. Olivia. I sipped the cold coffee finally, noting the bitterness. It matched the feeling that had settled in my chest. I was still in love with a version of him that existed only in memory, only in my imagination. And Hannah, she was not a threat, not exactly. She was simply a reflection of what intimacy could be when it wasn't a performance, when it wasn't a ledger of sacrifices and obligations. I watched them, unseen in their small interactions. A light touch on the shoulder, a quiet laugh, the way Liam's eyes softened when she spoke. It hurt less than it should have, but it hurt differently, like a dull echo, reminding me that love was not about possession, but about presence, and he had given that presence elsewhere. And I was learning to survive without it. The hospital room swirled around me in waves of heat and shadow. My skin burned, and every breath felt like inhaling fire. The steady drip of the 4 punctuated the fever, each click a heartbeat too loud, too insistent. I closed my eyes, but the darkness behind my eyelids wasn't restful. It was full of him, full of us, full of everything I had endured in silence. I was back in our apartment, or at least a memory of it. Liam's voice echoed through the kitchen, sharp and impatient. "Don't be so dramatic." I remembered gripping the edge of the counter during one of my worst bouts of gastroenteritis, praying he would stay. He had stayed, yes, but only long enough to check the monitors, adjust the 4, and leave. I had begged, pleaded for even a hint of concern beyond protocol, and he had given me efficiency, not empathy. The fever made past and present collide. I felt the soft brush of his hand on my hair, a moment I had misremembered as tenderness, but now recalled as obligation. I remembered nights spent awake, waiting for him to return from department dinners, rehearsing words to ask, to check, to show I cared. Every unanswered call, every shrug of irritation when I reached out, it all resurfaced, visceral, painful in its repetition. The dreamlike haze pulled me further. I was in the car, driving through a rain-slick street at night, hands gripping the wheel as I called him again and again, each ring unanswered. A voice in the back seat whispered, familiar yet alien. "You're too much, Olivia.
Stop asking.
Stop needing." It wasn't Hannah, not exactly. It was him, in every quiet dismissal, in every glance that didn't meet mine, in every day I had sacrificed myself for a love that existed only on his terms. I shivered despite the fever, imagining the empty apartment waiting for me at home, the coffee left cold, the lights off, the bed untouched, a reflection of the void he had left behind. My body ached, but it was nothing compared to the ache that had settled in my chest over years of habitual waiting. Love had burned slowly, quietly, not in flames, but in smoldering embers, eroding me without dramatic explosions, without confrontation, only the accumulation of absence. A nurse's voice broke through the fevered fog. "Olivia, how are you feeling?" I blinked, seeing her silhouetted in the doorway. The room seemed too large, the walls bending inward. I wanted to tell her I was fine, but my voice was swallowed by the weight of memory. I closed my eyes again, letting the warmth of the 4 flow into me, letting the present wash over the fevered shadows of the past. In that haze, I realized something. I hadn't just been ill physically. I had been sickened by expectation, by waiting for affection that would never fully arrive. I had loved too much, and in doing so, had lost the part of me that demanded to be noticed, that deserved to be seen. The room tilted, soft and quiet. And for the first time in years, I let the absence exist without resistance, letting it fill me, shaping me, not as a reflection of him, not as a shadow of love, but as the first fragile trace of self I could reclaim. The emergency room was chaos incarnate. Monitors beeped, nurses called out vitals, and the scent of antiseptic and adrenaline lingered thickly in the air. I was moving through it like a ghost, checking charts, adjusting IVs, aware but distant. And then I saw him. Liam. Standing at the foot of a gurney, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, hair mussed. His face was a mask of concentration, but I noticed the tight line of his jaw, the slight darkening under his eyes. He had arrived, fully present, fully professional, but I saw the fraying edges, the exhaustion he tried to hide from everyone else. "Olivia," he said, voice clipped, not a greeting but acknowledgement. "Liam," I replied equally flat. A patient screamed from the next bay, a young man in sudden cardiac distress. Orders flew fast. We were thrust into collaboration without a word of comfort or apology. Every movement precise, practiced, yet every glance at each other carried the weight of months of unresolved tension. He barked instructions at the nurses, and I adjusted the monitor as he ordered, our hands occasionally brushing over wires and tubing. I felt the old reflex, the tug to step closer, to anticipate his needs, but I resisted. My detachment was deliberate, a quiet shield. He caught me looking at him once, eyes sharp with irritation. "Focus," he said, softer than usual, almost vulnerable. I looked away, heart catching. That softness was brief, swallowed immediately by the steel of command. Later, in a momentary lull, he leaned against the counter, rubbing at his eyes. "You're managing fine," he said. Not a compliment, not exactly, more an acknowledgement. His voice betrayed something, fatigue, frustration, maybe even regret. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Silence between us carried more weight than any words could. The patient stabilized. The emergency that had flung us together receded, leaving the hospital smells, the hum of machines, and us. Two people orbiting each other with history unspoken but felt in every measured breath. "I'm leaving for rounds," he said finally, turning. "You can handle the rest?" "Yes," I said, not looking up. I watched him go. The door clicked softly, and the tension didn't leave with him. It lingered, suspended in the sterile air. Alone, I realized how much I had allowed him to occupy the spaces around me, even when he wasn't there. And yet, today I had maintained distance. Professional, unshaken. It was a small victory, but a meaningful one. And Liam? I didn't know. I only knew the collision of our worlds had left no debris between us, only the quiet echo of what had been, and a fragile awareness of what could no longer be assumed. I unlocked the door and stepped into the apartment, immediately aware of the traces he had left behind. A jacket hung over the back of a chair, its collar folded as if he had shrugged into it just moments ago. A mug sat on the counter, half full with cold coffee, fingerprints faint but unmistakable. The room smelled faintly of him, cologne, a hint of smoke, something musky that lingered long after his departure. The apartment felt smaller, heavier, yet empty. It wasn't just furniture or objects, it was the weight of habit, of memory, of expectation. Every corner whispered reminders of a presence I no longer wanted to occupy my life. I set my bag down and ran my fingers over the coffee cup, feeling the residue of routine, devotion, and unreciprocated care. I carried it to the sink, but didn't wash it immediately. Instead, I left it there, a symbol of acknowledgement and release, a small act of defiance against the inertia that had filled this space for years. I began moving things, shifting the sofa slightly, placing a chair where he had never sat, leaving empty spaces where his presence had once dominated. I repainted one wall in a muted gray, a color that absorbed memory rather than reflected it. Each stroke of the brush felt like a reclaiming, a quiet declaration. This space belonged to me now, not to what had been or what lingered. I left small notes to myself. Remember who you are. You exist outside of him. I placed them on mirrors, the fridge, the bedside table. They weren't angry notes. They weren't reminders to hate or resent. They were affirmations, little anchors to myself in the landscape of memory he had once occupied so completely. Evenings were the hardest. Shadows stretched long across the hardwood floors, and I imagined him moving through the apartment, turning on the lights, humming a song he didn't know I remembered. I closed the blinds, letting darkness reclaim the room, softening the edges of memory. It hurt. The absence was sharp and intimate, but it was my pain, owned and contained. By the time I collapsed onto the sofa, exhausted from the day's small reclamations, I realized something. Absence and presence both wound in their own ways. But absence could be endured. Presence could be rewritten. And I was beginning to do just that, one brushstroke, one note, one rearranged chair at a time. I closed my eyes, letting the ghosts linger just enough to acknowledge them, but not enough to let them dominate. For the first time, the apartment felt like home, not because it was full, but because it was mine. I hadn't expected to see her, Mara, one of the nurses from the day shift, standing by the break room with a clipboard in hand and a small, curious smile. "Olivia," she said, bright but cautious, "can I ask you something? Something about Liam?" I set down my coffee, wary. "Go ahead." She hesitated, glancing around as if the walls themselves might be listening. "He mentioned you yesterday. At rounds. About not being around." My chest tightened, a familiar ache settling in. "And?" I asked carefully, already anticipating the sting. "He said he worried. That he thought you were disinterested. That maybe you weren't checking in. He didn't mean it harshly, exactly. He just assumed." I blinked, letting the words sink. Assumed. That small, dangerous word, loaded with years of miscommunication and expectation. I thought of my unanswered messages, my deliberate distance, the afternoons I had spent nursing quiet resentment while he assumed my silence was neglect. "I see," I said, voice steady, but inside, something flickered. Not anger, not hurt exactly, recognition. The realization that the narratives we tell ourselves are often more destructive than reality. Mara shifted, uncomfortable. "I thought you should know. I know how tense things have been." I nodded. "Thanks." She left, leaving the hum of the hospital to fill the silence between my thoughts. I thought of Liam, exhausted, trying to navigate his own assumptions, unaware of mine. We had been talking in half-truths and shadows for years, both of us measuring love in gestures, absences, and misread intentions. I reflected then on myself. How often had I overcompensated, assuming his needs before he voiced them, stretching myself thin in a silent ledger of devotion? How many times had I sacrificed presence, attention, even rest, only to be misunderstood? How often had love become a careful performance rather than a shared experience? I realized love was fragile not just because of betrayal or infidelity or absence, but because of the invisible contracts we create in our minds. Expectations unspoken, needs unvoiced, assumptions left unchecked. The quiet destruction of intimacy was cumulative, subtle, and cruel. For the first time in a long time, I acknowledged that neither of us had been wholly right or wrong. We had been trapped in the narratives we told ourselves, leaving one another unseen even while standing side by side. There was no sudden clarity, no resolution. Only awareness, and perhaps the faintest glimmer of freedom. I stood at the edge of the train platform, suitcase in hand, listening to the distant rumble of the approaching train. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. Liam. I didn't check it. I didn't even flinch. For years, I had been conditioned to respond immediately, to reassure, to anticipate. But not today. The train arrived, its doors sliding open with a hiss. I stepped inside and found a window seat, pressed my hand to the glass as the city blurred past. Rain spattered the window, tapping a rhythm that matched the pulse in my chest. It was chaotic, wild, alive, and so was I. I spent the weekend alone, letting the city pull me into its unstructured orbit. I wandered streets slick with rain, letting the wind whip across my face, letting strangers brush past me without expectation. I sipped coffee in cafes without checking my watch, without imagining whether he would approve. I laughed at a man's terrible joke in a bookstore, bought a book I had no intention of finishing, and let sunlight streak across my face through the clouds. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the subtle thrill of self-possession. My body, my time, my attention, they belonged to me and no one else. I walked through parks, pausing under bare trees swaying in gusts of wind, and thought of all the times I had bent my own rhythms to his. How I had measured meals, sleep, even the tempo of my laughter to fit the invisible mold of what he wanted. And now, for 3 days, I didn't. A stranger in a small cafe struck up conversation, a woman with bright eyes and a crooked smile. She didn't know me, didn't expect anything from me. We talked about books, about absurdities of city life, about nothing, and I felt the lightness of connection untethered from obligation. It was brief. It was fleeting. But it was mine. By the time I boarded the train back home, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under pale sunlight, reflections fractured across puddles. I pressed my hand to the window again, feeling the city fade behind me and a new sense of self solidifying inside. Freedom was quiet, almost imperceptible, but it was mine. When I finally looked at my phone, Liam had left a single message. Call me when you can. I deleted it without hesitation. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't defiance for its own sake. It was a boundary, a reclaiming of the life I had let slip into habit and expectation. I let the phone rest in my bag, untended. I let the sunlight warm my face. I let the wind, the rain, the small encounters, and the quiet solitude imprint themselves on me. For the first time in a long time, I was not waiting for anyone. I was simply moving forward. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft scrape of paper against wood. I gathered the letters, the notes, the small reminders of years spent bending myself to fit him, and stacked them carefully on the kitchen counter. Each envelope, each scribbled page, felt heavier than it should. Weight of expectation, of devotion, of silent endurance. Outside, the sunset spilled gold and rose across the sky, light bending against the windows. I lit the match, holding it above the stack. The flames caught, consuming ink and memory in curling smoke. I watched as words I had lived by for too long turned to ash, carried away by the draft through the open window. The smell of burning paper filled the room, sharp and purifying, and I breathed it in like a promise. My phone buzzed. Liam. I didn't answer. A second message. Olivia, please. Can we talk? I sat back on the sofa, watching the last wisp of smoke spiral upward. I remembered all the times I had waited, worried, sacrificed, and the exhaustion that had followed. I remembered the small rebellions, the moments of defiance, the weekends spent reclaiming myself. I remembered the emptiness of habitual love and the clarity that now filled its place. When I finally typed a response, it was measured, calm. I've moved forward. I hope you find your peace too. No pleading, no explanation, no backward glance. Only the acknowledgement that love alone does not justify erasure. I set the phone aside. The room glowed softly in the fading sunlight, the shadows long but not oppressive. I poured myself a cup of coffee, this time drinking it slowly, deliberately, unobserved, undisturbed. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent yet alive. I felt the same pulse within me, steady, deliberate, unbound by expectation. I rose and walked to the window, letting the light wash over me, and for the first time, I felt entirely present, entirely myself. The ashes cooled in their small pile, remnants of the past scattered but harmless. And I stepped forward, into the quiet, into the sunlight, carrying nothing but clarity, autonomy, and the faint, enduring warmth of possibility. I was free,